Let me tell you about a discovery that Iranian engineers made 6 weeks ago that has been confirmed by multiple intelligence sources over the past 72 hours, and that fundamentally changes every assumption American military planners have relied upon regarding control of the Strait of Hormuz. This is not about a new weapon system. This is not about tactical deployment of known capabilities. This is about a geological and hydrographic finding that gives Iran permanent, irrevocable advantages in any conflict involving the strait, and that makes American naval dominance in the Persian Gulf effectively impossible to maintain under combat conditions. I am looking at technical reports from Iranian oceanographic research institutes that were published in specialized Persian language journals, satellite imagery analysis from commercial providers showing unusual Iranian naval engineering activity in specific locations, leaked Pentagon assessments that attempt to model the operational implications of what Iran has found, and confidential briefings to allied naval forces, warning them that the threat environment in Hormuz has changed in ways that cannot be easily countered. What these sources reveal is that Iran has identified and is exploiting underwater terrain features and ocean bottom characteristics that provide unparalleled advantages for submarine and mine warfare operations, advantages that no amount of American technology or resources can fully overcome. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to explain what Iran discovered, why this discovery makes the Strait of Hormuz nearly impossible for the US Navy to control or clear in any realistic conflict timeline, how Iran is already exploiting this discovery to position assets that American forces cannot effectively locate or neutralize, what this means for global oil security when a single nation controls the physical environment of the world's most critical energy choke point, and why the next decade of Middle East strategy will be shaped by geography that cannot be changed through military force or diplomatic pressure. This is Daily Brief, and what we are covering today will be studied in naval war colleges for the next 50 years. Subscribe now if you have not already. Let's start with basic geography and hydrology of the Strait of Hormuz, because understanding what makes this waterway unique is essential to understanding what Iran discovered and why it matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea beyond. The shipping lanes through the strait are only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Approximately 21 million barrels of oil transit through these lanes every day, representing roughly 21% of global petroleum consumption. There is no alternative route for this oil. Pipelines exist but cannot replace strait capacity. This makes Hormuz the world's most critical maritime choke point. The depth of the strait varies dramatically. The average depth is approximately 30 meters, but the seabed is irregular with underwater ridges, valleys, and geological formations created by tectonic activity and erosion over millions of years. The water column exhibits complex thermal layering and salinity gradients that affect sound propagation, making acoustic detection of submarines and underwater mines extremely challenging. These characteristics have been known for decades, but the specific details of bottom topology and composition were not fully mapped until recently. In March 2026, Iranian oceanographic research vessels conducted extensive bathymetric surveys of the strait using advanced multi-beam sonar systems. These surveys were ostensibly for civilian purposes, mapping underwater hazards and updating nautical charts, but the data collected has clear military applications. According to analysis published in the Iranian Journal of Marine Science, portions of which were translated and reported by the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, the surveys identified several previously unknown or poorly characterized seabed features. Subscribe if you are watching this and understanding that sometimes the most consequential military advantages come not from technology, but from detailed knowledge of terrain and environment. Now let me tell you what Iran found. Announcement number 1. Iran identified 14 underwater canyons and ridge systems along the northern approaches to the strait, where the seabed composition is ideal for concealing stationary underwater assets and where acoustic propagation is chaotic enough to make sonar detection nearly impossible. And this matters more than any weapon system, because if you can position assets that cannot be found, you control the battle space, regardless of how sophisticated the enemy's technology is. These underwater canyons range in depth from 40 to 90 meters, and in length from 3 to 12 kilometers. They are formed by ancient river channels that were submerged as sea levels rose after the last ice age, and by tectonic fractures in the seabed that create steep walls and irregular topology. The composition of the seabed in these areas is a mix of limestone, sandstone, and sediment that provides natural acoustic absorption, meaning that sonar signals do not reflect cleanly, but instead scatter and attenuate. Why does this matter operationally? Because these canyons provide ideal locations for stationary submarines to lie in wait, for intelligent naval mines to be positioned with minimal risk of detection, and for underwater sensor networks to be installed with long-term persistence. Iranian Ghadir-class mini-submarines, which are small diesel-electric boats designed for coastal defense, can sit motionless on the bottom in these canyons with all systems shut down except passive sonar. They are effectively invisible to American attack submarines and surface ship sonar systems because they generate no acoustic signature and because the background geology makes active sonar ineffective. According to assessments by U.S. naval intelligence, portions of which leaked to USNI News, American sonar systems are optimized for deep water operations where sound propagates predictably and where bottom geology is relatively uniform. In the complex shallow water environment of Hormuz's underwater canyons, American sonar effectiveness is degraded by 70 to 90% compared to open ocean performance. This is not a technology gap that can be closed through better equipment. This is fundamental physics of sound propagation in complex environments. The practical implication is that Iran can position submarines and mines in locations where they cannot be reliably detected by any means currently available to the US Navy. Clearing these positions would require either saturation bombing of the entire seabed, which is not feasible, or sending divers or underwater drones into each canyon individually, which would take months and expose clearance teams to attack from hidden threats. Think carefully about what this means. Control of maritime territory has traditionally gone to the side with superior naval forces. But if one side can exploit geological features to hide assets that the superior force cannot find, control shifts to the defender regardless of the attacker's technological advantages. Iran is the defender. The United States is the attacker trying to project power into a confined space where the defender has terrain advantages. This is a recipe for American failure regardless of how many resources are committed. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2. Iran discovered that specific locations within the strait have seabed composition that allows for installation of moored mines that are undetectable by current mine hunting technologies and that can remain operational indefinitely without maintenance or recovery. This is the mine warfare equivalent of the perfect ambush position. Traditional naval mines are either floating mines that drift with currents and are relatively easy to detect visually or acoustically, or bottom mines that sit on the seabed and are detectable through magnetic or acoustic signatures. Modern mine countermeasures rely on detecting these signatures using specialized ships equipped with sophisticated sensors and remotely operated vehicles that can identify and neutralize mines. What Iran has developed, and what the seabed topology allows them to deploy, are intelligent moored mines anchored to the bottom in positions where the geology masks their signatures. These mines use fiber optic cables for command and control rather than acoustic or radio signals, making them undetectable through electronic surveillance. They remain dormant until activated by shore-based command, at which point they rise to optimal depth using buoyancy systems and detonate when targets pass overhead. The seabed locations where these mines are positioned were chosen based on the bathymetric surveys Iran conducted. According to Iranian naval engineering publications analyzed by RAND Corporation, the mines are placed in areas where the bottom consists of high iron content sediment that creates magnetic clutter, making magnetic mine hunting sensors ineffective, and where acoustic reverberations from nearby ridges and outcroppings make sonar classification unreliable. The mines can remain in position for years because they are powered by lithium-ion battery systems with extremely low power drain. They only activate sensors when commanded to do so, meaning they generate no detectable electromagnetic emissions during dormant periods. The fiber optic control cables are thin and flexible, lying flat on the seabed and virtually invisible to visual inspection or sonar imaging. Stay with me because the strategic implications of undetectable minefields in the Strait of Hormuz are staggering. Mine countermeasures are among the most difficult and time-consuming naval operations. Even in ideal conditions with known minefields and cooperative weather, clearing a heavily mined area can take weeks or months. In the Strait of Hormuz, with mines positioned in geologically ideal hiding locations and with Iranian forces contesting clearance operations, American mine hunting forces would face unacceptable risks and timelines. a 2024 wargame conducted by the Center for Naval Analyses, results of which were partially published in Proceedings magazine, modeled a scenario where Iran deployed 500 intelligent mines in the Strait. The wargame concluded that clearing those mines while under threat from Iranian anti-ship missiles, submarines, and aircraft would require 3 to 6 months and would result in loss of multiple mine countermeasures vessels and dozens of personnel. And critically, Iran could remine the strait faster than American forces could clear it, creating a situation where the strait remains closed indefinitely despite American military superiority in other domains. This is the nightmare scenario for global energy security. If Iran can close the strait with mines that cannot be cleared quickly, the world's oil supply is held hostage to Iranian policy choices. No amount of American military power changes this reality because the problem is not military capability, but geological and logistical constraints that cannot be overcome through force. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this is where the analysis becomes truly concerning. Iran has shared detailed bathymetric data with Russia and China as part of expanding military cooperation, meaning that all 3 nations now have comprehensive maps of the strait's underwater terrain and can coordinate defensive operations based on this knowledge. In April 2026, a Russian oceanographic research vessel, the Admiral Vladimirsky, conducted joint exercises with Iranian naval forces in the Gulf of Oman. According to ship tracking data compiled by Marine Traffic and reported by Defense News, the Russian vessel operated in coordination with Iranian survey ships in areas where bathymetric mapping had been conducted previously. The most logical explanation for this activity is that Russia is validating and augmenting Iranian survey data, possibly installing its own sensor systems in coordination with Iranian networks. Chinese involvement is less direct but equally significant. Chinese Type 056 corvettes have conducted port visits to Iranian naval bases 3 times since January 2026, and during these visits, Chinese naval personnel were observed boarding Iranian survey vessels and participating in briefings at Iranian Navy headquarters. Intelligence assessments suggest that China is receiving Iranian bathymetric data to support its own naval planning and potentially to develop systems optimized for shallow water operations that could be employed in the South China Sea where similar geological conditions exist. Think carefully about what this cooperation means. The United States faces not just Iran in any Strait of Hormuz conflict, but an integrated defensive network that draws on Russian submarine expertise, Chinese sensor technology, and Iranian local knowledge and presence. This is multilateral anti-access area denial at the strategic level, and it represents a level of coordination among American adversaries that has not existed since the Cold War. The knowledge of strait topology also gives Russia and China the ability to advise Iran on optimal defensive strategies, to provide systems specifically designed to exploit identified terrain features, and potentially to deploy their own assets in coordination with Iranian forces. If Russia positions submarines in the underwater canyons Iran has identified, using Iranian data to avoid American detection, American commanders face the prospect of engaging Russian forces in a conflict they are trying to limit to Iran. This creates escalation risks that no American president wants to accept. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's discuss what American military planners are considering as potential responses to this discovery, because the options are limited and all involve accepting constraints that the United States has not faced in decades. The conventional American response to area denial challenges has been overwhelming force. If an adversary creates obstacles, deploy sufficient resources to overcome them through technological superiority, numerical advantage, and operational excellence. But geology cannot be overcome through force. The underwater canyons exist. The seabed composition is what it is. No amount of American investment changes these physical realities. American responses being considered include development of advanced autonomous underwater vehicles that can navigate complex terrain and locate hidden assets, deployment of significantly larger numbers of mine countermeasures, vessels to reduce clearance timelines, and acceptance that the strait may not be clearable on acceptable timelines and that strategy must adapt accordingly. The autonomous underwater vehicle approach is promising but years away from operational deployment. Current systems lack the endurance, intelligence, and sensor capabilities to operate effectively in the Strait's environment. Future systems may be more capable, but Iran is not waiting for the future. Iran is deploying now based on current conditions. The expanded mine countermeasures approach is feasible but expensive and time-consuming. The US Navy would need to procure dozens of additional mine-hunting ships, train crews, and position forces in theater. Even with this investment, the fundamental problem remains. Iran can mine faster than the United States can clear, and Iranian forces will contest clearance operations, imposing additional delays and casualties. The strategic adaptation approach involves accepting that American ability to control the strait is limited and that energy security must be ensured through alternative means: increased strategic petroleum reserves, development of alternative supply routes, diplomatic engagement to prevent closure rather than military planning to reverse closure after the fact, and reduced reliance on forward naval presence that is increasingly vulnerable and costly to sustain. This third approach is the one most aligned with emerging Pentagon thinking, though it faces significant political and institutional resistance. Accepting constraints on American military power is never easy for a nation that has enjoyed primacy for decades. But the geological realities of Hormuz may force acceptance regardless of political preferences. This situation has historical parallels that provide lessons for understanding current dynamics. During World War II, the Allies faced the challenge of German U-boats in the Atlantic that threatened supply lines to Britain. The U-boats exploited the vast size of the ocean to hide and to strike merchant vessels with minimal risk of detection. Allied responses included development of improved sonar, deployment of long-range patrol aircraft, breaking of German naval codes, and convoy systems that concentrated defensive assets. These measures eventually succeeded, but only after years of costly learning and only because the Allies had resources and determination to sustain the campaign. Iran in the Strait of Hormuz is analogous to German U-boats in the Atlantic, but with advantages the Germans never had. The strait is far smaller than the Atlantic, which limits hiding locations, but the complex geology provides concealment opportunities that open ocean does not. Iran operates from its own territory with short supply lines, whereas U-boats operated far from home bases. And critically, Iran's strategy does not require sinking thousands of ships over years. Iran simply needs to make the strait too dangerous to use, which can be accomplished with far fewer assets and on far shorter timelines. So where does this leave American strategy? Let me outline 3 paths forward. Path 1, technological breakthrough. The United States invests heavily in developing systems that can detect and neutralize Iranian assets in complex geological environments. This includes AI-powered autonomous systems, advanced sonar that compensates for acoustic challenges, and potentially directed energy weapons that can destroy mines and submarines through sediment and water. This path requires sustained investment over years, and accepting that Iran will exploit current advantages in the meantime. The likelihood is approximately 30% because it depends on technological progress that cannot be guaranteed. Path 2, strategic accommodation. The United States accepts that Iran controls the strait in any conflict scenario and adapts strategy accordingly. This means reducing forward naval presence, relying on standoff strikes rather than close-in operations, maintaining strategic petroleum reserves sufficient to withstand prolonged closures, and engaging diplomatically to prevent conflicts that would trigger closure. This path requires accepting limits on American power, but is operationally viable and relatively low cost. The likelihood is approximately 50% because it aligns with emerging strategic thinking about sustainable presence in contested regions. Path 3, military confrontation to establish control before Iran can fully exploit advantages. The United States conducts preemptive strikes against Iranian survey vessels, sensor networks, and mine stockpiles to prevent Iran from deploying assets while underwater terrain advantages are nullified. This is high risk and would require initiating conflict on American timetable rather than waiting for Iranian action. The likelihood is approximately 20% because the political and legal obstacles to preemptive war are substantial but cannot be ruled out if tensions escalate. I think path 2 is most likely and most prudent. The geological realities favor Iran. American technology cannot overcome those realities on relevant timelines. Strategy must adapt to conditions that cannot be changed, which means accepting that American control of the strait is no longer assured and planning accordingly. Here are the questions I want you to consider. First, does geological advantage in a strategic choke point outweigh naval and air superiority in determining control of that choke point? Second, can the United States develop technologies to overcome Iran's terrain advantages, and if so, on what timeline? Third, What does this situation tell you about the future of great power military competition when regional actors have deep knowledge of local conditions? Tell me in the comments whether you think American strategy can adapt to these new realities, or whether geological constraints will force fundamental shifts in Middle East policy. We will continue tracking how this situation develops. That is what Daily Brief does every day. Subscribe now. Share this with anyone interested in how geography shapes military power. Turn on notifications, and we will see you in the next analysis.